people in the podcasting game are very abundant. Like I've probably connected every single person on podcast on this episode. I've connected them with other people, right? And some people done the same thing for me. So it's like this great network multiplier that I think is required in business, which I didn't really know when I first got into business. I didn't realize the power of network. I was like, I could do it by myself. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another Campfire Capitalism episode. Today, we have an amazing guest, a fellow digital nomad, traveling the world, doing lots of cool things, building a business. And let me introduce this special person to you today. Her name is Anne. She started her digital nomad journey in 2018 after studying long and hard to get her master's in both law and business, guys. She turned down the dream job at a big law firm to travel the world after a year of backpacking and working crappy jobs. It was time to follow her dream and start the Podcast Babes. The Podcast Babes help podcasters monetize their podcasts before they have thousands of downloads. They do that by offering masterminds, online courses, and done-for-you podcast production. And now has a home base in Hamburg, Germany, while traveling as a part-time nomad and running her podcast agency. Wow. I'm super interested to hear your story, your journey, and a little bit about your philosophy around podcasts. Welcome to the show.
Yeah. Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. I can remember when I first met you, I was in Turkey. I was like, man, this girl's energy is off the charts. And
no pressure, really, though.
No pressure. I just love meeting other podcasters, right? It's just something about the sauce, right? So talk to me a little bit about like this transition from, thinking you're going to go into law. Like you spent a lot of time in school, a lot of, turning the pages in the books. You were going on this path to, do law, and then you pivoted to be an entrepreneur and also digital nomad at the time, right? So like, talk to us about that, like that origin story. I'm just pretty curious, like how did that occur?
Oh yeah, it has been a journey, like mentally and physically. So I always had the idea I'm going to be a lawyer. That was my plan since I think I was like 14 when I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, like super young. So I did everything that I thought you needed to do to become a lawyer. So I went to university, went to law school, did all the things, got all my degrees, even did business on the side, because I had like one moment just before starting law school where I was like, but what if I want to do business? And then I was like, okay, I'll do both. So I studied a lot. I also finished all these degrees with a massive burnout. Like it was no fun. I was not eating. I was not sleeping. I was super stressed. And I was like, oh my God, I got to like start a new job, like start a whole new career now. And that also got me thinking, like, is this really what I want to do? And I did 2 internships while studying in a medium-sized law firm and a small law firm. And to be really honest, I hated it. Like, I just did not have a good time there. And that also got me thinking, like, am I really going to go into the office every day? I just really couldn't see myself do that. Like, I couldn't picture myself in an office every day. And then also in a law firm. And I think law, and I mean, I only know the industry in the Netherlands, of course, but like there's a lot of hierarchy. When you start working in a law firm, like you really have to study, like you study years and years, but then you start by literally just reviewing documents for lawyers, like you have to start really at the bottom. And I was like, just doesn't sound appealing to me. I just don't really want to do it. And then I was like, you know what? I don't have to. I'm just not going to do it. And I was lost. I had no idea what the alternative was. I was like, I worked so hard for this. So what am I going to do now? Like, I don't know. So I spent a few months being like very lost, and I applied to some jobs more like in business consultancy, that space. and didn't get hired. I mean, I'm not surprised because I was also not 100% convinced that that was what I wanted to do. So they probably could also see that talking to me. So yeah, that didn't really work. And then I thought, okay, my plan was always to go traveling between finishing university and starting my career. I always thought I'll just travel for a few months and then I'll like really start this like grown-up life.
A few months.
A few months. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just go travel, like as a true millennial, I'll just go backpacking in Asia to find myself. I am the cliche. It's true. But honestly, it worked. I went backpacking in Southeast Asia. I went to Australia, did my working holiday there. And actually there in Australia, I worked on a strawberry farm. I was a professional strawberry picker for 4 months. And that just basically gave me a lot of time to think because it was just me and the strawberries, like every day. So, I don't know. I just had a lot of time to think, what do I want to do with my life? And I already knew about people who are digital nomads and remote work and that whole movement that was already a thing in 2019, of course. So when I was in Australia, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to try it. Like, I don't have anything. I have nothing. I don't have an apartment. I don't have stuff. Like, I literally have one backpack. I don't have a job. So that also means I have nothing to lose, like absolutely nothing to lose. So I'll just give it a shot and see what happens. So yeah, that's how it all started. That's the origin story.
Man, I just like send it. Man, you lost me at picking strawberries. Just me and the strawberries for 4 months. That's like super. Did you do wolfing? Was it wolfing?
No, but no, it was in Australia. When you're doing your working holiday, you can do a minimum of 88 days of, like, they call it farm work, like, but they have certain requirements. So it needs to be in a rural area and it needs to be, I don't know, a certain job. And if you do that for minimum of 88 days, you can get the same visa again. So you can do another year of working holiday. So it was never my plan to actually do this, but I needed a job. And my aunt she lives in Australia. She knew a person who has a farm, and she was like, well, I can get you a job. I mean, you'll have to pick strawberries, but I can get you a job. Sure. And then I also didn't really have another choice at that point because I just needed the cash.
Yeah. I feel like most people on this journey, there's always a moment where maybe it's not like you don't have money in your bank account, but maybe you're in a situation where like your car doesn't work in a certain country, possibly, right? Like something, like you forgot to call your bank and tell them you're here, and you're like, wow, like now you got to get creative to figure out, okay, how do I get immediate cash now while I figure this other thing out, right? I think that's pretty common. Like, yo, no joke, I legit left my debit card in the ATM machine, right? And I obviously they eat it and it sucks. I'm like, man, good thing I have one card left I can use to take money out, right? So, I feel like most people run into those situations, right? So let's talk about this, right? So that's how you started. So talk to me a little bit about like the podcasting journey, because I think that as people listen to this podcast, I think that's pretty relevant to how they can impact their business or even like their networking as well. Talk to me about like your philosophy around podcasting and how that has developed over time, and some of the benefits and how people can leverage it within their business.
Yeah, absolutely. My favorite topic. I'm always happy to talk about podcasting. So I've been working in podcasting since exactly that moment, like on the farm in Australia. I went into podcasting, working for clients. Then I also started my own podcast. And podcasting is awesome. First of all, it's so much fun because you have an excuse to talk to awesome people and meet people all over the world, which has just been so much fun. But apart from that, like apart from the fun part, it's also really interesting what happens to someone's business once they start a podcast. When you start a podcast, like even if you have 5 episodes, all of a sudden, it just gives you this legitimacy of, okay, like you have a podcast, so you know your stuff, right? Like when people have a podcast, it's a thing. It's like when you wrote a book. I think that for a lot of people, a podcast can do that. So even when you're new on the podcast journey, I think a lot of people say, yeah, podcasting is like long term. And I kind of agree. I think the most benefit is what you see after at least a year of podcasting. But you also have these like quick wins in podcasting, which I really love. Makes it extra fun. And why it works so well also for business owners is because people listen to your voice every week or every 2 weeks or whatever it is. But like over and over again, people hear your voice, they hear your thoughts and your opinions and like you talking about things that you're interested in, passionate about. And that builds a connection with people. It's actually relatively easy to build trust with an audience to a podcast. They're not scrolling through Instagram and see like a quick video or a caption or anything. No, they're really here for this episode with you and they're listening to you. Usually also a lot of people listen with headphones. They literally hear your voice in their head. Like how creepy, but also how cool.
Wow, you put it like that. And I'm like, man, I probably listen to 75% of episodes with headphones on. I definitely vibed with what you said with you have this connection. Like there's probably 3 podcasts that like I'm obsessed with. Like as soon as they come
Digital
out,
Nomad Stories.
I'm plugged in. Yeah, Digital Nomad Stories. That's my second favorite. That's the second favorite. I love Digital Nomad Stories. It's great. Yeah, it's just like crazy because then I also connect with them differently on social media. Like you know what I'm saying? Like it's something different.
You feel like you know them.
Yeah. So talk to me about like the monetization side of it. Like, cause I'm a sales guy, right? Like money talks, we're capitalists here, Campfire Capitalism, obviously. So talk to me about like your methodology around like using a podcast to increase revenue or to, return an investment on making a podcast. Cause it takes a lot of time, effort, money, right? Resources into doing it. Not a lot, but it's not like, you're doing a TikTok video, right? Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about
commitment.
It's a commitment. Like most people don't last more than 3 months, right? Isn't that the statistic? Like most people drop off after 7 episodes.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I am the cliche also here. Again, I'm one of these people who had pod fade after 7 episodes, which is exactly the average. So when I started my podcast, I made all the rookie mistakes, including this one where I just had a few episodes out and then I was, busy and took a break because I didn't see any ROI, like any immediate ROI. I felt like no one was listening. So I was like, oh, I'll just take a break, whatever, like no one will notice. And then all of a sudden it was like 6 months later. And I was like, oh yeah, I have this podcast. Oops, that got out of hand.
Season 2.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I did. I revamped the whole thing, gave it another name, and it's Digital Nomad Stories today. But yeah, that happens to a lot of podcasters. So I do want to say that I think really committing to it is important. I think you can do podcasts on a lot of different ways, right? You can work in seasons. You can just do weekly episodes. You can do every 2 weeks an episode, even every month if you want. You can just record and upload an episode whenever you feel like it. It's all possible. And I think there is something to say for all of these options. I think not having a podcast versus uploading an episode when you feel like it, then okay, uploading an episode when you feel like it is still better, I think. However, best practice is weekly content. Every week there's a new episode released. And I have experimented a lot with this, like release schedules and things like that. And I found that there's like, it makes sense. There's good reason why people release weekly episodes. So as business owners, or entrepreneurs, weekly episodes, I would recommend it if you can manage that. And what that will do for you and for your business is every week, people have new long form content from you. Every week they see your podcast in their podcast app. So you stay top of mind. I wanted to say very easily. I wouldn't say that it's very easy to release weekly content, but you stay top of mind. So that is one way how you can use podcasts. And what that also does, if you have this content that is there every week and people listen to you talk for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it is, every week, I already mentioned it, like you build that trust with people. And that makes it very, very interesting to then also promote your own services, promote your own products, digital products, maybe, because you already have that connection with your audience, especially when your podcast aligns really well with what your business is also about, which it probably does because it's what you are about, right? So then it's a really logical next step for people to take. Once they listen to a few of your episodes, they probably want more because you are awesome and your content is awesome. So then it's actually relatively easy compared to other marketing channels to then say, hey, by the way, I have this thing that I can sell you. So for entrepreneurs, I think most profitable and also probably easiest way to monetize a podcast is to just sell your own stuff.
I think you hit the nail on the head. When I first, so I think this is funny. I want to be super transparent here. I had my first podcast called The Zed Beat, and I started it. I had some really good traction, and I just stopped. Something else happened, like you said. Nothing really that was busy. I just came up with a reason because I didn't feel like doing it, right? To a certain degree. That's maybe, that's me being radically honest. And I regretted it. And then I had like, oh man, do I have like, because it's a commitment, right? To do it. You have to find guests, you have to do other things. And when I started this podcast, when I first started, I took a whole different approach because that first experience taught me, I was like, okay, I need to line this. I need to like go all in and do it. And actually overinvested, which is, I wish I met you beforehand. Like I had 2 people on the team doing it. Like I had 2 other guests in the first 20 episodes, 25 episodes. And I just simplified it as we went. And I'm guessing I'm the last man standing because, we're recording like, once a day. We're doing 2 episodes a week, and we're eventually going to do one a day, one like 5 days a week eventually, or so we're going to ramp up to. And I had this moment where I was not reaching burnout, but I was like, okay, like I got a lot of things going on in the business. I'm traveling a lot, and, we need to slow this thing down. So we did it to once a week, and it actually blew up the podcast even more. I thought that was the most fascinating thing in the world. We went from 2 weeks to 1 week. I was like, hopefully no one noticed. And it grew faster. I thought that was so fascinating. A real quick point before I ask you another question. I say this, I think, on a podcast a lot around networking. I think that as an entrepreneur, if you're selling high ticket services in general, I think it's such a savvy move to interview amazing people. Like you're bringing on amazing people that you're not only like building a relationship with, you're learning from them. And then like you're also having the ability to also access their audience or their network as well, right? Because people in the podcasting game are very abundant. Like I've probably connected every single person on a podcast on this episode. I've connected them with other people, right? And some people done the same thing for me. So it's like this great network multiplier that I think is required in business, which I didn't really know when I first got into business. I didn't realize the power of network. I was like, I could do it by myself. But
same.
You know what I mean? I could do it by myself. I could figure it out. Like it's cool, right? Like I'll just build it and they'll come. Like I'll just, pick up the phone every now and then, call some people and they'll buy.
Yeah.
Like no, like you gotta build a team. You know what I'm saying? Like, I remember this one dude was like, Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Poor Dad dude. I love this. Is the only thing I agree with one of these. I might be in cash flow and all this stuff too, but he says a lot of crazy stuff that I don't agree with. But one of the things he says is like, man, when I go into business, I play rugby, bro. I don't play golf. Like I'm not a one man person. If you one person going against like five people, like I need to have lawyers and accountants, and the same thing in business. I need to have people and that I can consult, right? And I think podcasting creates that environment where you meet people that beforehand I was spending 10,000 or more a year to network with people, like going to different events. And like podcasting, y'all just got to pay for production, and I create content at the same time too. It's a win, man. Sorry, I'm not trying to jam this on your, but I just think it's so savvy, and you just got to be disciplined and do it, and it will literally compound over time. It's a compounder. So I'm super curious from my selfish vantage point. Sorry, audience. Hope you get value out of this as well. But hey, look, I'm gonna give you some game here. So I'm curious about the monetization sequence. What are some best practices to blend some of those products or offerings? Like I'm just interested. Like, you don't have to give us like, I mean, if you want to give us the game, right? But what's the framework of like best practices of like selling your products with your podcast, like in a subtle way, right? I guess not like where you're not feeling like you're jamming it down their throat.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good point, because I know some people, especially entrepreneurs, a podcast needs to have an ROI, right? You're not just putting in money, energy, time that your team spends on this for something that is just going to cost you and nothing's going to come back. So yes, I think money is important, but I think what you said is really important, that it's subtle and that you give value first. I think that value first approach is so important. I did an audit of a podcast a few months ago, and it was a new podcast. First episode, it started with an ad for his services. It's your first episode. Like, no one knows you. Why do you have an ad? Yeah, no, I mean that you haven't provided any value yet. So I think just maybe it's also like common sense in like, that's I don't want to be harsh about it. Like it's something that we have to be a little bit considerate about, like provide value first. But then when you're a few episodes in, I do think that you can say something about your product in the intro. So in general, there's like different places in the podcast where you can mention your products or services. You have the intro, outro. You can do an ad in the middle of the podcast. You have the show notes. So there's actually a lot of places where you can talk about what you have to offer. You can also do a full episode about your product. But what I wanted to mention here is like all these places have a bit of a different role. In the intro, if you talk about your the thing that you're selling, let's say your service, you want to keep it really short, because people don't start listening to hear you talk about your product. They start listening because they want to get into the content. So you can mention it, you can make people curious, but I wouldn't go like a minute into, or like 90 seconds, even longer into what you have to sell. Yes. Just like short, 1 or 2 sentences about your service, and then let's get into the episode. Mid-roll, you have given people value. They want to hear the rest of the episode, so they'll stick around. So there you can have a little bit more time to explain more about it. Still, like, to the point. If it's 5 minutes, then I'm also just going to stop listening and listen to someone else's podcast. But you can take a little bit more of people's time there. And then in the outro, you want to have a really strong call to action. Because in that mid-roll snippet, you want people to still listen to the rest of the episode. So you don't necessarily want people to actually leave and go to your website. You just want them to be super curious and be like, oh my God, like after this episode, I'm really going to look this up. And then in the outro, you're going to tell them exactly where to go. And you can use all three. You can use a combination. You always want to have a link in the show notes so that people don't have to remember your website. So yeah, that's how you can promote your stuff. I also wanted to mention a podcast is also amazing if you're doing launches, if you're launching products or courses or ebooks or whatever it is. Some hosting platforms, they allow you to have dynamic ads. So what that means is that there is an ad in your podcast for a certain time. You can just upload it once, like click one button, and it's in all episodes, like all previous episodes, all new episodes. And then also with one click, you can also take it out again. So that is super, super handy if you run launches. So then you can really promote one thing for a certain time, like 1 month or a few weeks or something. So that's also something to consider.
Yeah, I might be hiring Anne, guys, because I need to start plugging in all 3 ads on Evergreen, right? I'm like, man, I'm overthinking too. Like, how many other clients I can also bring this to, right? To a certain degree. So this is good. So this is some good stuff. So I got a question. I got a follow up. So I get the ad thing, the psychology, that was sick, right? In terms of the behavior, what's required to keep them hooked in, for why they're there. I want to talk about this because you've had some experience doing this, and I'm just curious. So what if someone in our audience has a podcast, right? They didn't align the podcast, let's say technically to their business, or let's say they're doing a rebranding, right? For a launch or for a new book that they're writing. What do you recommend in terms of, would you tell that person to rebrand, or would you say just start another podcast?
I think that's a difficult question. So the cool thing about podcasting is you can also you can do a lot of creative things. You can also do a series within your podcast. You can do like an extra episode every week about a slightly different topic. Like, as long as it's related and as long as your audience is still interested in it, you can actually link quite a few things to your podcast. I think starting a whole new podcast, I wouldn't recommend that necessarily unless it's like completely unrelated. Of course, then you like, if your audience, your existing audience, is just not going to be interested in this at all, then of course, like you just have to start a new podcast. But if it is related to what you're already doing, I would just get super creative and do like I don't know, like October is book month, or extra episodes. So I also did it's different, but I did extra episodes on Thursdays. Usually we always had new episodes on Mondays. And at one point I was like, okay, I want to provide more episodes. Like, I want more content. So we took interviews, and I took out like about 10 minutes with like the best point of the interview and released that on Thursdays. So you can also do something like that with a specific topic for a limited time, or maybe even for, I don't know, for forever. So I would just get a little bit creative with the format.
Got it. Okay. Last question. So something super savage I've seen in the past that I know I won't forget, that I thought this was such a savage marketing technique. So like, you heard of blue fishing before? You hear that term? Like,
no,
doing things on orthodox. So it's pretty much this guy. I think his name's Serene, something like that. He's a Brit, and he started, like, he does these like crazy things for people. So they have these crazy wish dream lists. Like, I don't know, like, yo, I want to have a dinner at Yankee Stadium right after the Yankees play the Red Sox, so I could propose to my girlfriend. Right. So you try to make things that are impossible. I need it to happen tomorrow, bro. And he would just find a way to do these crazy things. And why I brought this up is because he started off with throwing like parties and events where people had to have the password to get in. And so where I'm bringing this up is because I remember a podcast, Johnny Rocket, that guy, the guy, 2 Chainz, former manager, if some of you guys know. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But he had this like podcast where you had to have the password. It was a podcast locked behind the page. It was a private podcast. And I thought that was such a really creative way. It's almost like, as an entrepreneur, I'm like, man, like, if I was offering, let's say, a master class or something like a tripwire product before someone bought, let's say, a done for you services, done with you, or do it yourself, maybe like a more intensive, right, a course. I was like, man, it'd be savage if, let's say, if I did a podcast or, someone in my network or a client did a private podcast as a podcast, but it's really a master class, right? Where it's a ton of value that's private and they have to have the password to get in behind the wall to get access to it. Like have you seen someone do something like that or similar like that? Like where they have like a public podcast and then a private one where either they pay to access it, maybe like a Patreon. I know that's pretty popular, right? Patreon, things like that. Like, have you seen that be really successful?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. I think it's also, it also depends a little bit what your business model is maybe. So if you sell high ticket services and there's like you said, there's multiple stages that you go through with people, so to nurture them, then I think private podcast would be awesome. On the other hand, if your podcast is the business, that's also possible, right? If it's about the content, you can also build a whole community around it. You can work with sponsors, so like other brands that you can promote on your podcast. You can do events, like you can always do events for your podcast, of course, also when it's part of your business. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to monetize podcasts. Also something that you can easily do for entrepreneurs or people whose podcast is the whole business is to add affiliate links to show notes. It's also super easy to set up. But yeah, also behind episodes behind a paywall or a private podcast can definitely work. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think a podcast where like a private, man. Yeah, I need to think on that. I'm not going to do it. I don't know if I'm going to do it. I'm just like, I love thinking like little creative things, right? You can share with other people. But this was fascinating. So, we talked a lot about podcasting. So if someone's interested in podcasting, like how could you help them?
Yeah, so we provide done-for-you podcast management services. So if you want to launch a podcast or if you already have a podcast and you want our team to take over all the production stuff, so that means that you just have to record the episodes and that's it. Then we handle all the backend stuff, all the audio editing, show notes, all of that, like the annoying stuff. We also help podcasters monetize their show by finding sponsors for them. So we research brands that you could partner up with, and we also reach out to them to get a call in your calendar. So that's pretty cool. That's like our newest offer. And yeah, then I'm also working on some interesting other things. So to be continued, there's more coming. But if you're interested, everything is on the website, thepodcastbabes.com. So if you want to know more about the new things that are coming soon, then definitely check out the website and you'll find everything there.
Boom. Check out the links in the show notes, guys, unless you're driving, wait till you get to your destination. But I want to appreciate you. I want to say thank you and appreciate you for coming on the show and giving us some value.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for listening, everyone.
Sick. So guys, congratulations. You made it to the end of the episode. I'm super grateful for you giving us your most precious resource on the planet, which is your time. And we are so excited to see you at the next campfire. And we are out. Ciao.